Reims, France, 2:41 in the morning, May 7, 1945. Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith presses a fountain pen to a sheet of foolscap in room 119 of the College Moderne et Technique. Eisenhower is not in the room. The Supreme Allied Commander is one hallway away, by his own decision. Smith has been awake for 19 hours. The man across the table is Colonel General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Staff of the German Wehrmacht. The piece of paper between them is the document that ends the war in Europe. The room is 30 feet square. The walls are covered in operations maps showing every advance of the last 11 months. The pens on the table, one Russian, one American, one German, will become the most photographed objects of the next 48 hours. None of them will be held by Eisenhower. Eisenhower will not shake Jodl's hand. He will not look at Jodl until after the signing is complete. He has told his chief of staff that he will not sit at a table with a man who served Adolf Hitler. So Beetle Smith does it. Jodl signs first. Smith signs second. The Russian observer, Major General Ivan Susloporov, signs third. The French witness, Major General François Savez, signs fourth. The whole ceremony takes 20 minutes. Jodl asks to speak. He says in English, "I want to say a word." Then in German, his voice cracking once, he says the German people and German armed forces are for better or worse delivered into the victor's hands. No one translates for him. No one answers. The Germans bow stiffly and leave. Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith has just ended the largest war in human history. His name will not be in the headlines tomorrow morning. Eisenhower's will. Smith does not seem to mind. He has done this before. 20 months earlier, on the morning of September 3, 1943, he signed a similar piece of paper under an olive tree in a Sicilian field. The Italian government surrendered to him there too. The pattern is established. Eisenhower negotiates. Smith signs. Eisenhower is photographed. Smith goes back to work, but to understand how a high school dropout from Indianapolis ends up signing 2 enemy surrenders. For Eisenhower, we have to look back to 1911. When Walter Bedell Smith was a 16-year-old machinist at the National Motor Vehicle Company, and the choice he made that summer would put him in the room with George Marshall 20 years later. That choice would make him the only officer Eisenhower ever fully trusted, and the wound he took in 1918, in a French wheat field he never wrote about afterward, would still be killing him 43 years later. His father was a silk buyer. His mother worked in the same dry goods store. Walter was the older of 2 sons. He never graduated from high school. He took a factory job at 14, joined the Indiana National Guard at 16, and earned a battlefield promotion to second lieutenant in 1917 after his commanding officer noticed the way he ran a flood relief operation on the Ohio River. He shipped to France with the 4th Infantry Division that summer. He was 22 years old. The men in his platoon nicknamed him Beetle, after his mother's maiden name. It would follow him for the rest of his life. In the Aisne-Marne offensive of July 1918, Beetle Smith took a German bullet through the side. The wound never quite closed. The doctors gave him a steady stream of bicarbonate of soda. Within a few years, he had a chronic ulcer. By the time he met George Marshall at the infantry school at Fort Benning in 1931, the ulcer was permanent. Marshall noticed 2 things about Smith immediately. The first was that he was the most organized man on the post. The second was that he never asked for anything. Marshall did not forget him. September 1941. Marshall, now Army Chief of Staff, brings Smith into the War Department as Secretary of the General Staff. February 1942, Smith becomes United States Secretary of the Combined Chiefs of Staff. He runs the meetings. He writes the minutes. He keeps the British in the same room with the Americans through fights about strategy that nearly come to blows. By the summer of 1942, Marshall is sending Eisenhower to England to plan the invasion of Europe. Eisenhower asks for one man by name. The man he asks for is Beetle Smith. For the next 3 years, Smith runs Eisenhower's headquarters. North Africa, Tunisia, Sicily, the negotiations with the French in Algeria, the diplomatic crisis with de Gaulle, the shouting matches with Montgomery. Every fire Eisenhower cannot personally extinguish, Smith extinguishes. Eisenhower writes later that Smith is, in his words, the general manager of the war. By the summer of 1943, the Italian government, under Marshal Pietro Badoglio, who has just deposed Mussolini, is sending secret envoys to neutral Lisbon, asking the Allies how to surrender. Eisenhower decides he will not meet the Italians himself. He sends Bedell, Smith. On the night of August 31st, 1943, an Italian general named Giuseppe Castellano arrives at Cassibile, an Allied camp in occupied Sicily, 11 miles south of Syracuse. Smith meets him there with British Brigadier Kenneth Strong. The negotiations last 3 days. The Italians want guarantees against German reprisals. Smith gives them none. The Allies want unconditional surrender. The Italians have no leverage. On the afternoon of September 3rd, in the shade of an olive tree, Castellano signs. Smith signs second on behalf of Eisenhower, who is on Malta. Smith picks an olive branch off the ground and puts it in his pocket. The next day, he mails it to Eisenhower as a souvenir. Marshall, in Washington, sends Eisenhower a cable. He uses Smith's name. He writes, "I want to speak a word of sincere praise for the superb manner in which General W.B. Smith has handled these negotiations. It is one of the only times in the entire war that George Marshall publicly praises any officer by name." Eisenhower keeps the cable in his personal files for the rest of his life. Eisenhower writes later, in his memoir Crusade in Europe, that he could not have run the war without Beetle Smith. He says it plainly. He says he relied on Smith for the things he could not do himself, and that Smith handled them better than he would have. The man who took the photograph with the pens at Reims, the man whose name the world knows, said in print that the man at the table did the harder job. What happens in the next 8 minutes is not in the official record. If this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe. We are just getting to it. April 30th, 1945. Adolf Hitler shoots himself in a Berlin bunker. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz becomes head of state. Dönitz has one objective. He wants to surrender to the Americans and the British, and keep fighting the Russians long enough to get as many German soldiers and civilians as possible across the Elbe to the west. He sends Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedeberg to Reims on May 5th to propose a partial surrender. Von Friedeberg meets with Beetle Smith. Smith refuses. He tells von Friedeberg the Allies will accept only an unconditional surrender on all fronts, signed at Reims, witnessed by the Soviets. Von Friedeberg cables Dönitz. May 6th. Dönitz tries again. He sends Jodl, his chief of the operations staff, the man who has signed every major Wehrmacht order since 1939. Jodl arrives at Reims airport at 5:08 in the afternoon. He is escorted to the Collège Moderne et Technique and shown into a side room. At 6:15 Smith brings him into the war room. Jodl tries the same tactic. He asks for a separate Western surrender. Smith tells him no. He tells Jodl that if Germany does not sign an unconditional surrender on all fronts within 24 hours, Eisenhower will seal the entire Western Front. No more German soldiers will be allowed across to surrender to the Americans. Jodl radios Dönitz at his headquarters in Flensburg. He asks for authority to sign. The answer takes 7 hours to come back. At 2:30 in the morning of May 7th, Dönitz cables Jodl one sentence: full power to sign in accordance with the conditions as given. Jodl walks back into the war room. He sits down across from Beetle Smith. The Russian observer is there. The French witness is there. Eisenhower is one hallway away by his own decision. The pens are arranged. The interpreter reads the surrender terms aloud one final time. At 2:41 in the morning, Jodl signs. Smith signs second. The ceremony lasts 20 minutes. Jodl makes his short speech. No one answers. The Germans leave. Eisenhower is brought in. He asks the Germans one question through the door before they go. Do you understand the terms of the surrender? They say they do. He asks if they will carry them out. They say they will. He says nothing more. After they are gone, Eisenhower poses for the photograph with the pens. He holds two of them up in a V. Beetle. Smith stands behind his right shoulder. Smith is not smiling. Smith has not smiled in 3 days. There is a celebratory toast with champagne drunk out of mess tins. Smith drinks his standing up. The European War ends at 1 minute after 11 on the night of May 8, 1945. Beetle Smith is 49 years old. He has never commanded troops in combat. He has never had his own theatre. He has not slept more than 5 hours a night since 1942. Patton, who outranks him in popular memory but has lost twice as many staff fights, tells his wife Beatrice in writing that he refuses to eat at the same table with Beetle Smith. 2 months before Patton dies in the Heidelberg hospital, he writes the same line to Eisenhower. Eisenhower says nothing back. He keeps Smith on staff. March 1946. President Truman names Beetle Smith United States ambassador to the Soviet Union. Smith does not want the job. His ulcer is bleeding. His doctors tell him a Moscow winter will be worse for it than a Berlin one. He goes anyway. For 3 years he sits across from Vyacheslav Molotov in the Foreign Ministry, drinking vodka he cannot keep down. He watches Stalin tighten the lid on Eastern Europe. He sends home some of the earliest sober Western analyses of what the Soviet Union actually is. He returns to Washington in 1949 with 10 fewer pounds on him and a permanently damaged stomach. October 7th, 1950. The Korean War is 4 months old. The Central Intelligence Agency, founded 3 years earlier, is widely viewed inside the Truman administration as broken. Truman wants a soldier to run it. He picks Beetle Smith. Smith takes the job for the same reason he takes every job. Marshall asks him to. For the next 2.5 years, he rebuilds the agency from the ground up. He creates the Directorate of Plans, which becomes the covert action arm of the United States government. He fires people no one else will fire. He makes the CIA, in its later director Allen Dulles' words, what it is today. In 1953, Eisenhower becomes President of the United States. The first thing the new president does is bring Beetle Smith out of the agency and make him Under-Secretary of State, second to John Foster Dulles. It is the last position Eisenhower ever gives him. Smith retires from active service in 1954, exhausted, his weight down to 148 pounds. He takes board seats at the United Fruit Company, RCA, and Corning Glass. He continues to give Eisenhower private advice on foreign policy for the next 7 years. He never speaks to a journalist on the record about Reims or Cassibile. The afternoon of August 9, 1961. Smith is at home in the Westchester neighborhood of Washington, D.C., reading the Sunday papers. He stands up to get a glass of water. The heart attack takes him on his feet in the hallway outside his study, next to a bookshelf where his copy of Eisenhower's Crusade in Europe sits open on a low shelf. His wife Norrie calls for an ambulance. The driver runs every red light between the house and Walter Reed Army Hospital. General Walter Bedell Smith dies in the back of the ambulance, 6 blocks short of the gate. He is 65 years old. General Walter Bedell Smith is buried in Section 7, grave 8197, of Arlington National Cemetery, on a quiet rise about 300 yards south of the tomb of the unknown soldier. His wife Mary Eleanor Klein Smith, the girl from Indianapolis he married in 1917 on the way to France, is buried beside him. He is 2 rows over from Audie Murphy. He is one short slope above the spot where the Kennedy eternal flame would be lit 2 years after he was put in the ground. The headstone is small. It does not mention Reims. It does not mention Cassibile. It says, in regulation block letters, General, United States Army. There is no nickname on it, no campaign list, no mention of the 2 enemy surrenders he personally signed, or of the war he ended for Eisenhower while Eisenhower stood one hallway away. The man Eisenhower called the general manager of the war, the man Patton refused to eat with, the man who put the Soviets on notice and built the modern Central Intelligence Agency, the chief of staff who outworked, outlived, and outdrank his own body, and then died at 65, 6 blocks from the hospital, in a Sunday afternoon ambulance no one stopped to photograph. If your father, your grandfather, your uncle, anyone in your family served at SAF or with the 4th Infantry Division, or in any unit in any branch on any front in Europe between 1942 and 1945, leave their name and what they did in the comments below. Don't just leave the name. Tell us one thing about them, one thing they did, or one thing they said, or one thing you remember. The men who were there deserve more than a name in a database. They deserve to be remembered as people. Subscribe if you want the next chapter. There are more of them. There are always more of them.